welcome. You're welcome. All right, so just for those of you who don't know anything about me, I have been doing weight loss evaluations for 10, 12 years at this point. I've been working with the bariatric population pretty much exclusively in the last like 6, 7 years. I'm based in New Jersey, and I do, in my office, I do most of the evaluations for most of the surgeons in New Jersey. Work with about 35 to 40 in New Jersey. I also work with surgeons remotely doing the evaluations in Colorado, where I'm licensed, in Ohio, where I have a license. I have licenses all over the place. Plus, I have a passport mobility, which allows me to work in as well remotely in participating states. At this point, probably conservatively, if I said I've done between 12 and 15,000 evaluations, that would probably be a little bit conservative. So pretty well versed in what it's all about. As I say, having worked with people to try and be as successful as possible. So when Cara asked me to do this, I could talk about anything really, and I could talk for hours about anything to do with the weight loss surgery. One of the things she suggested was talking about sort of relationships and how weight loss surgery can kind of affect relationships that people have. Now, so there are many different ways in which weight loss surgery can impact relationships you have. And feel free, if anyone has any questions, somewhere I think there's a chat thing that you can type me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I can pivot and turn in any direction you want. Essentially, what I sort of describe to people when I'm talking about how it impacts relationships, I kind of say to people, look, imagine a pond, okay? Imagine you're standing in the pond and you have a stone in your hand, okay? You drop that stone in the pond, okay? Now what happens? As the stone hits the water, you get ripples that go all the way to the edge of the pond. Now, nearest the stone are the biggest ripples, and as you get towards the edge of the stone, edge of the pond, the ripples get slightly smaller. Weight loss surgery is the stone, right? As soon as you have weight loss surgery, everything changes. Okay, and all of those little ripples are your relationships. Now, we have relationships, we have family, we have spouses, we have kids, we have co-workers, we have the person who runs the local, where I come from in England, we call it an off license, you call it like a local newsstand, local news store. We have relationships everywhere. And basically, the way you kind of look at it is the biggest ripples are the ones closest to you. And then as you get further out, little ripples, but still ripples. Now, let's talk about relationships, starting with at home, and then we'll work our way out, okay? So the first thing that normally changes is your relationship if you have a spouse or your family, other people living in the house, is the people immediately around you living in the house, okay? How does that change? Well, immediately off the bat, right, we're behaving totally differently when it comes to food than we have been behaving before, right? So now we are eating differently. Our attitudes towards food changes. How we go about eating the food changes. Meal time, simple things like meal times change, right? So if you've got a family or you've got anyone else in the house, you're sitting down to eat, right? And now all of a sudden you're eating differently than everybody else, right? Maybe your portion sizes are smaller. Maybe you're eating the same thing, especially as you get further down the line, but initially, like you're not eating, your food's pureed, right? Everyone else can eat regular food, your food's pureed, and then as you go through, so you're constantly eating differently to everybody else in the house. Now, if you're fortunate that you have an unbelievably supportive family, they will roll with that, and it won't be much of a problem. If your family is slightly less supportive of what you're trying to do, then that could potentially present problems, right? So there's your first ripple, okay? Within the house, as you're behaving in the house on a day-to-day basis, especially when it comes to food, there's your first ripple, okay? Again, other things like, as you're going through, Oh, that's a beautiful cat, by the way. As you're going through, you know, you're also changing how you interact with yourself, right? Now, one of the things that you have to change is the relationship you have with yourself, okay? Prior to weight loss surgery, okay, I joke with people that whenever I'm talking to people and I'm doing it, before you have weight loss surgery, especially if you live in a house with other people, right? You imagine it's a horse race, right? You got a couple of horses out front, okay? They're either your kids, your significant other, whatever, and you're kind of towards the back in the pack, all right? You know, you're not last, but you know, you're not first either, right? You're prioritizing other people around you, right? Typically. Once you have weight loss surgery, that changes, right? You go from being like in the pack. Now, if you've got kids, you're probably never going to be first. You're not going to win the race, right? But you might move up to maybe second or third instead of being like, you know, fifth or sixth. Now, again, that's a change. That's a change in the relationship you have with yourself, because now you're prioritizing yourself maybe in slightly different ways. And I often sort of say to people is one of the hardest things about weight loss surgery is learning how to prioritize yourself, because it is totally counterintuitive to how we're raised, to how we look at the world, right? We look at the world and we're raised oftentimes to prioritize everybody else around us, okay? And now you're at this point where you're having weight loss surgery, and really, like I say, you're never going to be at the front of the pack, especially if you've got kids and things like that, but you're prioritizing yourself in a slightly different way, and that is totally counterintuitive. It's like one of the hardest things for people to do, okay? That and not eating and drinking at meal times are probably two of the hardest things for people to try and do after the surgery. Prioritize yourself. Now, you know, the analogy I use to get people a little bit more comfortable with prioritizing yourself is the fact of, if you go on an airplane, right? You're sitting on the airplane, they're doing their pre-flight thing, and they say to you, like, right, if the oxygen mask comes down, you don't put the other person's on first, you put yours on first before you put the other person's on, right? Now, I don't know if you've been on a plane, and I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, like, if my 9-year-old's sitting next to me, you got to be kidding, I'm putting mine on first before hers, because it's like totally counterintuitive, right? Totally counterintuitive. However, the logic is, and the logic tracks, right? If I die trying to help her, right, we're both done for, right? If I put mine on first, and at least I've got some oxygen coming in, I'm now in a better position to help whoever's next to me, right? Again, it's totally counterintuitive, totally counterintuitive. It goes against everything we're programmed to do, but it makes sense. And that's also what happens with weight loss surgery. You're now in a position where you're prioritizing yourself instead of everybody else around you. Feels uncomfortable, doesn't feel right, feels weird, feels like you're doing something wrong, but you're not, okay? So, stone's gone in the pond, first ripple, let's say yourself is the first ripple, next ripple is whoever else is living in the house, right? Now, friends, okay? Now, if you've got any sort of friendships, okay, any sort of group whatsoever, any sort of social group at all, what happens is within that social group, everybody fills a role, okay? So if you've got a group of friends, okay, you fill a role within that friend group. Another friend will fill another role, and another friend will fill another role. Now, if you happen to be the only person in the group who's overweight, or you're the heaviest person in the group, you're the heavy one. Right? That's how they look at you. That's how people look at you. You're now the heavy one, right? Or you're the heavy one. Now, once you start having weight loss surgery and you start losing weight, with any luck, knock on wood, you're no longer the heavy one anymore. Now, that is a difficult thing for the group to accept, okay? Our social groups, the way we're socially set up, social psychology will tell you that if there is a change within a system, the first thing that happens is the system resists the change. The first thing, because it's the easiest thing to do. It's the easiest thing to do. If I've got a group of 6 or 7 people, right, and one person changes, it is so much easier for the group to change that one person than it is for those other 6 people to change to the new person, right? It's just so much easier. So social psychology will tell you that if there's a change within a group, the group will resist the change and it will try to actively stop the change. Now, it's not intentional, right? So when your friends do it, they're not doing it on purpose, right? They're like programmed to do it as part of social psychology. Now, they'll try to change you. Now, you probably may have experienced this, right? You might get some comments like, why did you do that? You look better the old way. Now you don't look as good. You know, you've lost too much weight. All kinds of things they'll try, and all of it's designed is to try and get you to stop doing what you're doing because it's more difficult for the group to accept. Now, what social psychology will also teach us is eventually there becomes a tipping point where the group has to accept the new reality. Okay. Now, you don't have to do anything to get them to accept the new reality. They'll get there on their own, but they will get there. So from your point of view, how do you deal with that? You just have to wait it out, effectively. You just have to wait it out, because if you wait it out, they will come round to your side and they'll basically say, look, you know what? You know, if it's my group of friends, they'll be like, well, James is like not changing anymore, right? I can't make him change. So maybe we now got to change to the system, right? Now, other reasons why the system changes is it's a threat to the person. Now, imagine you've got someone else in your social group that has been thinking about their weight. They've been thinking about the fact that they're not quite happy with how heavy they are. They've been considering doing something, but they've really sort of decided that they don't want to do it. Now, you having weight loss surgery is a threat to them because they've decided not to do it. But now it's got them thinking, well, if they can do it, maybe I should be doing it. Again, it's programmed in. Nothing you can do about it. It is what it is. It's going to happen. You got to wait it out. You got to just go through it. Okay. Now, so we got yourself, we got spouses, family, friends, we got all of that. Co-workers will be the same. Okay. Again, easier, and it's group dynamics. It's the same thing wherever you go. It's easier for everybody else to get you to change what you're doing than it is for them to change even just how they look at you. Right. So, and it's just basically the same. So you'll go to work and people will make comments and things like that. And they'll try and, again, it's not often intentional. Now, sometimes it is. Sometimes the people are just arseholes and they will just do stuff. Right. But for the most part, it's not intentional. Right. It's just the group reaction. It's the individual reaction. Right. So again, if you just wait it out, they have to come to you. They have to come around to your way of thinking. There becomes, like I say, that tipping point. They have to get there. You just got to wait it out. You got to just ignore whatever they're saying and realize. And what normally helps me with a situation is if I know why someone's doing something, it is so much easier for me to ignore it because I can at least say, I know why you're doing that, right? I know what your game is, and I'm just not going to give into it, right? Now, again, not necessarily doing it on purpose, but if you can know that, like, basically what they're doing is what they're programmed to do, which is resist the change, you can at least say, okay, I know what you're trying to do. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm not going to play the game. And eventually, like I say, there's that tipping point where they change. Now, the other thing with relationships, which is really important, which you have to do, you have to recognize that your place within the group has changed. Now, I'll give you a classic story of this with someone I worked with once, right? So they were telling me this story of, so they had weight loss surgery and then they moved jobs, right? So they moved jobs and they moved right before some sort of function. So they're at the function, right? And they gravitated towards this group of people that happened to be overweight, right? Whether it was just instinctual, comfort, whatever, gravitated. So this group of people that were overweight, they're telling me a story, and he's saying, like, they're all standing there and they're all like kind of like making fun of being overweight, right? They're kind of doing that and they're kind of like making fun of themselves and stuff like that. And the patient I had, like, just instinctively joined in, right? Now, he said to me, you should have seen the looks they gave me, right? And he's like, I couldn't understand what was, I was there and I was like looking around, and it took me a few seconds. And then it took me a few seconds to realize I'm not part of that group anymore. They look at me as the outsider, right? They look at me as the outsider, and I can't say the things that they're saying. Even though I was one of you, right? I can't, because they don't know me. They don't know I've had weight loss surgery. They didn't know I used to be 150 pounds heavier. So, and they shot me, and they shot me these looks. Now, again, when you're talking about relationships, you also have to recognize that you're not the same person to look at. You're the same person inside. You know, a lot of the time people say to me, like, am I going to have like a personality change when I have weight loss surgery? It doesn't change personality. That's set. That nothing's changing that, right? But what it does do is it changes where you stand within any circle of people. So you also have to recognize that when you've had weight loss surgery, that what you don't look like the same person anymore, right? But in your head, you're still the same person. Like, nothing's changed for you. You're still that same person, but you have to recognize that the way the world looks at you is different, okay? Now, the other thing is, while we're on the subject, and I'll go off on a tangent. I do this a lot. I go off on tangents because as I'm talking, I start to think of things. But the other thing that you have to do is you also have to recognize, and this is one of the things that normally gets people really angry after weight loss surgery, is they recognize how badly the world treated them when they were heavy, when they were overweight, okay? It's a different world. It's a different world. You get treated totally differently. You get looked at differently. People don't look at you as being lazy, because people tend to think people are overweight and lazy. The stereotypes, right? You're lazy, you're not motivated, all of that stuff, right? All of a sudden you lose 100, 150 pounds, even 80 pounds, whatever. Now all of a sudden you're not as lazy. So you'll get treated better. You'll get treated better when you go into stores. It's amazing. And it really normally pisses people off, because you think to yourself, like, all those years I've spent putting up with what I've had to put up with, and I didn't even sometimes even realize, right, the difference. So again, like, the way you interact, your relationship with the world changes. Your relationship with the world changes, okay? And that's, again, another thing you have to try and just account for, be aware of, like all of this stuff. There's no way you're going to like get it like that, but if you're at least aware of it, you can start gradually making the changes, okay? I kind of basically say, I have someone who I work with regularly. Every Saturday morning we talk for a couple of years at this point. And the way I describe it is, you know, you're still walking down a street. It's just the next street over. It's not the same street you were walking down before. It's just the next street over, right? And that's how you have to look at it, right? Everything around you looks the same. Nothing looks different. There's still houses, there's still parks, there's still cars, there's still everything. But the street is just moved. And that is very disconcerting. Very disconcerting. And we can go into body image, right? We can go into how you view yourself, because like I say, it weirds people out, because everything looks the same, but it's different. And that is, like I say, that can like really weird a person out, right? Especially when you look in a mirror, you're 100 pounds down, you look in a mirror, you don't see that 100 pounds, right? It's the same mirror, just everything looks different, and it weirds you out. It does. It weirds people out, okay? When you talk about body image, you talk about the fact that, you know, it takes a while for your brain to catch up with what it's seeing, right? Your brain is programmed. Now, when we talk about that, we talk about neuroplasticity, okay? So neuroplasticity is this wonderful thing that as we're kids, right, we can adapt. So if something changes to us or our environment, neuroplasticity allows us very quickly to adapt to it, right? So the classic example is if a kid gets a scar, say a kid drops some boiling water on their arm and they get a scar, the kid will just automatically assimilate that, and they're still kid. They're not kid with scar, they're just kid. Neuroplasticity. As an adult, you get a burn mark and you get a scar, you're person with scar. Neuroplasticity, as we get older, gets less and less and less. We get less flexible, which is a shock, I know, but we get less flexible, right? And so therefore, anything that changes, it takes longer for our brains to accept the change, which is why sometimes people, when they look in the mirror and they've lost 50, 100 pounds, they say, like, I don't see it. I don't see it. Neuroplasticity is not as good. It's slower. It's slower for your brain to recognize the changes, the subtle changes, even the big changes. Okay. But like I say, another tangent, we're going to try and get back on track. But basically, it all revolves around relationships. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about, you know, most importantly, we're talking about the relationship with ourselves and the relationship with people around us. And like I say, you have to look at it as weight loss surgery is you're dropping a stone in a pond and those ripples just keep going towards the outside. Those people closest to you get the biggest ripples. As you get further and further out, you still get a few ripples, but they're much less intense. They're much easier to handle. But just recognizing that the idea is that change is very threatening to ourselves and everything. People don't like change. I don't know if you've noticed about other people and yourself. We're very resistant to change. We're not big on change, right? If we can keep something going the same way, we will, right? So when we get change, we get threatened, and therefore we try to stop it, right? And that's just what happens. It's just what happens to ourselves. It's what happens around us. And like I say, you have to realize that that's what's going to happen. And and you just have to realize where it's coming from. Now, there are a lot of positive changes as well. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom. All right, you know, you're feeling better about yourself, right? That's another relationship change with yourself. You're feeling better about yourself. You're feeling more healthy. You're feeling more flexible. You're feeling like you can do more things. Those are positive things. Sometimes it improves our relationships if we're in a significant other. It improves our relationship in that way. We're happier, right? So therefore, oftentimes our relationships are happier, right? So there are lots of positive stuff, but like I say, it's all about being flexible. It's all about adapting. It's all about adapting to what's going on around us and recognizing that when something is going on around us, really its deep down goal is to try and stop us from doing what we're doing. And it's not intentional, 100% not intentional, but it's just the system reacting. And we have to trust ourselves, right? We have to trust ourselves in what we've done and what we're doing. And if we do trust ourselves, and this is where support systems come in, right? If you've got a really good support system around you, it's so much easier, right? Because you have people supporting you have people you can like vent to, you have people you can talk to. So again, support systems are really, really important. It's one of the things that I really always encourage people to do is get a good support system in place, because that'll set you up beautifully to be able to handle anything that weight loss surgery throws at you.